I just want to start as we think about what it means to serve in the church. And I'm going to primarily use Peter's letter. And if you're familiar with that, you'll know that it is a... Sorry, maybe we'll just blank the screen, mate, just so it's not distracting, because we're not going to be up there quite yet. It's primarily a book about hope. Those of you that, if you've read it before, you don't get too far into the first chapter where Pete starts talking about Pete. Hey, Pete. Hope, but talking about it as a living hope, as this thing that is alive, and that when we think about it, it's actually this reality. It's not just this idea of hope, but it's actually real. And I couldn't help but think about Rudgy's sermon today, just about persecution and what does that mean for us as a church? What does it mean for us as we serve, our attitudes, our motivations, knowing that in many ways the physical dangers that Rudgy talked about, we have a law in place to protect us from that. So even if we are harmed, the law steps in and takes care of that. Whereas obviously we were talking about people that are persecuted in a way where the law wouldn't step in, that you would lose your life. And yet the irony of all that is that I preached on love the following week, last week, and that same love chapter is given to this same people, that same love part is given to the same people that are about to be persecuted. So often we think of love, we think of all the things we can do, opening up our home and using our money and stuff like that, and yet, in a sense, coming out of our abundance. And yet, this church that was about to be persecuted, in a sense, that the early church, the church as it started, was really born out of poverty and born out of persecution. And so I want to think about that as a church, just as we start, as a focus point, that everything in our lives is up for grabs. And what I mean by that is like your wife, your husband, your children, your career. When you choose to lay down your life, it's all up for grabs. It's the one thing that can't be taken from you. Sorry, these are all the things that can be taken from us, and yet there is one thing that can't be taken from us, which is namely the love of Christ. And that's what Peter's going to say in a second to this church. But as I was thinking about Rudgy, what he was saying about persecution, I had this idea that, a lot of the times we live in such a nice culture. We have a law that pretty much says you do the wrong thing, you will be punished. And so the flip side of that is we have a large percentage of the population that aren't Christians, and yet they're very nice people. They're not, breaking the law. They're not murdering people they're confined in this law, and somehow God's common grace is keeping them from maybe doing a lot worse things than they probably could. And so sometimes we feel like because we just live with all these nice people that all we have is our words. So we think we've got to fight for an argument at work, or we think we've got to, nail down the theory of evolution or something like that, which is they're not bad things at all, but sometimes we feel because they seem as nice as us that our words are the only things that matter. And yet, this command to love it's a much higher calling, as we talked about last week, than just being nice to people. And I just want you to think of that picture of the early church who are about to be brutally persecuted, and yet they're called to love, You've got this church that's being attacked on the inside, the outside, and yet they're told to love. And yet here we are 2,000 years later, and where are our attacks coming from? Here's a picture, the Hebrews writer. This just blows me away when I read this. This is what the early church was like, the people that got this idea of God loving them and what it meant to love other people in the midst of persecution. It says this, Hebrews 10:34, "For you had compassion on those in prison, and you joyfully accepted the plundering of your property, since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession and an abiding one. Now, here we have this picture of Christians going and visiting other Christians in prison. And it's like they've spent this time in prison with these people, and then they've been identified as Christians for doing that. And on their way home, they come home and they just see the couch being taken out. They see the TV. It's just looting. And then after they've done that, they light the place up. And we're told that they joyfully accepted that. You joyfully accepted the plundering of your property. And it wasn't like, yay, we've lost everything. It wasn't that at all. It was the fact that they had a better possession and an abiding one. And so what I'm trying to get at with that is that it's the only thing, God's love for you is the only thing that can't be taken away from you. Like those things I listed before, family members, career, your house. You know, just make the list. It can all be taken away. And we do live in a country where we have a lot. And when somebody does lose something like that, it is seen as quite drastic. And yet in the early church, it was happening all the time. And yet that was their attitude. But, you know, if our car breaks down, we complain. It's like our world's fallen apart. And I want to challenge you, is that the type of love? Is that the type of church we need to be? Like, this is all to define the type of people we are, so that when I come to the practical things that we're going to talk about, that we're clear about who we are as a church. There's a really great picture in the story of Les Miserables. Has anyone seen that before? Knows the story? It's about a guy called Jean Valjean, who, I think I've pronounced that properly, probably not. It's set in the 1800s, before the Revolution, and in France, and he's been in prison for 19 years. He stole a piece of bread to feed his sister, and then he tried to escape, and so every year he tried to escape, they kept adding more time on. So he should have only been in there for 5, but he ended up being in there for about 19, 20 years. Anyway, so he gets released from prison. He's like this really hard, sort of rough guy. He's got no money. Obviously, you've just been kicked out. Where do you start? So he stays the night in this church. And in the middle of the night, he collects all the silverware off the table. That there was these like silver, really nice like candle holders. And so he just clears the whole lot, you know, puts it in a bag and nicks off. And the priest is not aware at that stage. Anyway, the cops catch him. And they bring him back because they know that he stayed the night there. And all they need the priest to do is identify this guy so they can send him back to prison. He's like, we know this is your candle, you know, your silverware. And then the priest does something quite remarkable. He goes and grabs the candles and he says, "Mate, you forgot the candles that I gave you as well." And so in this moment where this guy should be judged and sent back, the priest actually gives him this amazing gift of forgiveness. And the cops take his story, and so they nick off. And so he's left there with this silverware and these candles with this priest that has just spared his life. And he pretty much tells him that God has spared his life and that he should go and live in response to that. And that's how I feel like we should be when we come to God. You know, we talked about this great command last week, what our church should look like, which is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." And God just hasn't given us silverware and candlesticks. He's given us his Son. And so when we talk about how we do things as the church, it's important to remember why we're here and why we're doing them. It's not because we're nice people. It's because we've been given a gift of life. And we should go out of our way, even in our own families and our own lives, to remind ourselves of the love of God, whether it be songs, maybe you do put a post and wear it at the front of you. Maybe you need to do that to remind yourself. I don't know. But what it's getting at is go out of your way to remind yourself about how great God is, and then with that, pour your energy into it. And so here we come to 1 Peter, which is where I just want to draw out this idea of being the church and what it means for our motivations on how we do things. Because you can't really come to the Bible and find out this is how you do church. You see pictures and you see letters addressing things, but a lot of the times it's not like there's not a book on the church. So I wanted to talk about our attitudes and our motivations. So if you have a Bible, you can open up to 1 Peter 4, verse 7 to 11, and he says this: "The end of all things is at hand. Therefore be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another. As good stewards of God's varied grace, whoever speaks as one who speaks oracles of God, whoever serves as one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong glory, dominion forever and ever." Here we have this picture, these ideas that Peter is giving us about the type of people we should be in the church. And he assumes a couple of things, and that we love God and that we're living by his Spirit. And so that's why he can say things like, you need to be self-controlled. You need to be sober-minded in making decisions in terms of planning what you can commit to church. Like, we're given God's Spirit to work through those things. He talks about loving each other earnestly. I just think, what does that look like? I find myself, doing something really nice for someone, and it's almost a live in this honeymoon period for the next couple of days. Like, I'm living in that afterglow of like, oh, that was good. And you sort of can't get it out of your head. Next thing you know, you've just sat for 2 days. It's like we get so content with these little things we do for each other rather than like, hey, what's next? That's what Peter's getting at here, is like, you don't sort of keep this list of like, well, look at that, I mowed Parky's lawn, so I'll wait for the grass to grow back before I go do something nice for him again. I've never mowed his lawn, by the way. Hospitality without grumbling. Sorry? Does it? Okay. There we go. We'll leave that for the practical part at the end. Maybe we'll do the list like Rudgy did, and I'll make sure Rudgy gets that one. Hospitality without grumbling. Hospitality without grumbling. It is such a rich ministry in our church, those meals that you guys and women drop around to people's homes. Like, I talk to other people in other churches, and it's just not happening. Like, people fall through the gaps all the time, and yet we have this great ministry. And I just wanted to encourage you that you can really ruin that moment really quickly by grumbling about it. And we're called not to do it. And ultimately is because I think when you do start grumbling, when you've been hospitable, is that you're showing that you haven't actually done it for Christ. You've wanted a reaction. You've wanted this audience. You wanted this, hey, I did this for you. You're in need. Look at me. I'm so loving. You mightn't be saying that, but that's what's coming forward. That's what your actions are showing. So I just want to encourage us to be a church that doesn't grumble. And you know what? We need to just pull each other into line when we do it, I mean, it happens all the time in marriages, like you're being grumble. Well, it happens in mine anyway. If I'm being a grumble bum, Tiffany sort of chips away at me to sort of bring me out of that. And then you do come out of it, sometimes hours in my case. And, amen. And then you think, why was I like that? Why was I just ruined this great moment by forgetting what Christ had done for me, and that was my motivation. The next thing that verse talks about is a gift, using your gift. Now, a lot of the times I've been in churches where, you start writing down your gifts and all this type of stuff, and you go, oh, this is what I've got to do. I guess I'm stuck to that. And some of you are young, and you probably don't even know what your gift is. You think, oh, well, I don't preach, I don't play a musical instrument or what. I can't do anything on Sunday. And I know we're talking about Sunday, but what I want you to think about is that a lot of the times your gifts are shown when you start loving people. When you see a need and you go for that and you just say, you know what, I'm just going to love this person. I don't even know if I'm gifted at it, but you just trust God and you're just going to love that person. And if you do that enough, you'll start seeing what you're gifted at. Sometimes you're going to fall on your face, but I just want to encourage you, if you're sitting around trying to figure out where you fit in this church, it doesn't start with you figuring out if you're a good soccer player, musician, baking scones. It starts with, are you going to love people? And when you start with that, then it'll show up. And then you'll have people go, man, you know, that was awesome when you did that. I just was so encouraged. That's what he's talking about. But you've got to actually do something. A lot of the times, if we do the whole list approach, where we look at our lists of what we think we're good at, we don't get anywhere because we start comparing ourselves to other people and we go, oh, well, he does all this. He's a 10-list guy and she's a 15-list person. And you start doing this silly thing where you just go backwards and forwards instead of actually just loving people and just letting those gifts come out of that love. So that's what I wanted to have to say about that, so you're just not crippled thinking about, oh, you know, who am I? But actually just hold on to Christ and just go for it. You might look really silly doing it, but that's all he calls you to do. And then this is one for people. So he's just talked about, just to sum all that up, this idea of being self-controlled, loving earnestly, hospitality without grumbling, using your gifts. Like you see this picture everything is alive in this church, and it's alive in terms of God's love flowing through people because of God's Spirit, and they're doing it because they love Christ. That's the picture we see. And so now if you jump down to Peter 5:1, he focuses on the leadership and how we should respond as listeners or people that are maybe wanting to be in the leadership one day. He says, "So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. Shepherd the flock that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility towards one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble." So again, the message coming to those who are in leadership positions is that you shouldn't be here because you feel like you need to be, like that's your job, like you're under compulsion. He wants you to be giving it willingly and to be eager about it. And I just want to honour you men that are loving us and taking care of us, because I definitely feel it and sense it. And I just want to encourage you to keep going with that, to being those examples that us younger men can look to follow Christ. And I just want to honour you men in that, because I know you get together, you pray, you give up time, precious time with your family, and I know God's going to honour that, and I just want to encourage you to keep on that, because it's a very early stage in this church, and I don't know what the next 5 years are going to look like, but I just pray it would continue to be shaped by that humility that you've exampled to us. And so for us younger men and women, sorry, I know the text says men, but yeah, we need to be respectful as well. So sometimes they can see things. The thing about us young guys is that we don't have it all together, contrary to our popular beliefs. And so when we have someone who's older in the Lord than us come to us and talk to us about something, we need to be humble about it. And it's very easy to react and very easy to be proud and think, oh, who are they to say it? But just remember, these people have been here a lot longer. They've walked with the Lord a lot longer, and we need to show respect. So I know there's a lot of people here that aren't here this afternoon, but we need to model that to them as well. in how we show respect to the people that are shepherding us. And I love how Peter finishes with this idea of humility. It's that if you're in the church and you are trying to serve people, but you're doing it under compulsion, and you're proud, God's going to oppose that. Whether that be in a sermon preparation, whether it be leading up the front, taking communion, or even just looking after the kids in there. Like if you're proud about that, then God's going to oppose you, and He will show you up for what you are. And I mean, that goes for any ministry, I guess, in the church. I'm sorry to just focus on those. But that's what the text is. But we should be humble. But I think these days too, we think of proud people as very... I think we've gotten a lot cleverer as mankind being proud about things. We kind of hide it. And so it comes out in things like, I was unorganised, I didn't get enough time to prepare this, or, you might be leading communion and you just stumble through it. You go, I'm just going to let the Holy Spirit take care of it, and you just say 2 words. It's because you're unorganised, but it's because you've left it to the last minute and you've ramped all this effort into this last 5 minutes to somehow care for God's flock, and you're expecting God to show up and do something amazing, and yet you've been proud for months leading up to it. A lot of us, we're rostered on months, time ahead, whether it be preaching, leading, different things like that. And it shouldn't be a shock to us when we look at a planner and can see your name months ahead. Why are we rocking up unorganised? I'm talking to myself here too, because as I was thinking about this, we ended up running late for church, and I was just like, coming right back at me, but that is a proud spirit, is when you say, I'm not going to give God the 20, we might have 30 days to prepare something, whether it be leading, thinking about how you're going to talk through communion, what you might do for Sunday school, whether it be a teaching role. Why is it we're rocking up and we're not organised? And I want to put it to you that it's being proud. It's being proud in those moments when God said, here is time, sit with me, plan this, and we go and do something else. I mean, I'm thankful for the last minute. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad that it happens because we get stuff done. But we need to be aware that God opposes that. And it's no wonder that, I've preached sermons before where I have crammed it all into the last minute. And you wonder why people just leave and the same old thing happens, And it's like, I just think he just does. He just withdraws it and goes, well, why am I going to hold out a blessing when you've spent all this time doing other stuff, and then you want me to show up on a Sunday and do cool things in people's hearts? God opposes that. And so we need to be humble. We need to keep each other accountable and be humble with that. Would people agree with that, what I'm saying? Because I see that in myself, and I want to get better at that. Like, if I say I love you guys, I want it to show up in how I prepare a sermon with music. It can be even practicing a song. Like, I'm not just picking on people leading or doing a sermon. It's really how we function. A lot of us wouldn't rock up late to our workplaces, half an hour. It's like, I didn't want to come for the first half an hour work because that's the singing time and it's really boring. I just wanted to come for the sermon because it's a good bit. It's like, why do we have this idea about church like that? And yet, you're there. You start at 9, you're there at 5 to 9. Like we have this respect for the world, and yet, I guess we'll get there when we do on church. Like, I'm sorry if that's irritating, but we need to hear it. Like, we need to start keeping ourselves accountable as a church and showing it in practical ways. 1 Peter goes on. He says, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. To him be the dominion forever and ever. You know, as a church and as an individual in this church, boy, we've gotten good at excuses for why we don't love each other or why we just don't come to things that we say we're going to be at. You know, and sometimes it is overwhelming. Sometimes we have these worries and these anxieties that just cripple us in our homes. But what Peter's saying here is that Jesus has actually borne them on the cross, and we need to cast them onto him. He's wanting to care for us by us giving them to him. And God's not a liar. Like sometimes we think, oh, this is like a therapeutic verse where it's like, oh yeah, I'll think about it in my mind that God's got it. But no, he's actually saying, stop worrying about it. Stop making excuses. You know, I shared this the other week where I probably had 99% of the sermon done and I really wanted to get home and finish it, but we had to clean the cafe. And I was just getting really grumpy and I was just like, oh, that'd be right. Here I am, Lord. And you know, if we had 2 more people rock up, we would have knocked it over by lunchtime, but instead we were there till about, 5 or 6 at night or something like that. And here I was getting all grumpy, and when really, I should have finished the sermon before Saturday. And yeah, it was just this moment of, well, am I going to trust God? Am I going to actually, because I couldn't leave. I was stuck. I knew I was there for another couple more hours. I was like, am I going to trust God and just go, you know what, you're going to give me this time to finish this last 1%? It was pretty much done. But, and am I going to get in? Am I going to scrub the poop out of that sink that should have been cleaned? And it was like, I did. I just trusted him. I said, I'm going to trust you. And I just gave it to him. And I didn't care what was going to happen with the rest of the day. And it was amazing. It was just like it changed my whole demeanour and how I was serving because I'd given it to him. I said, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to trust you. You're going to be there for me, even if I'm doing this at that 1% that I need is at 10 o'clock at night. And he was just so gracious. It just turned this whole cleaning experience into this joy and, my thoughts could focus. And that's such a small, petty example. But Jesus is there wanting us. So what I want practically to happen when you think about that verse is that you wake up Friday morning and you really want to go to prayer time and you feel tired. Are you really going to put up with that excuse? I know some of us work early, some of us are shift workers. I know there's a dynamic there, but I really want us to think about those silly excuses we make as a church for things where we say, I'm going to be somewhere, and then I can send a text. It's just so easy to go instead of going, you know what? I don't know how this is going to go, but I'm going to trust you. I know that going to prayer is going to be good for me, or whatever it is, whether it's having a meal with someone that you just keep putting off and off and off, and just going for it and just trusting God, casting your cares on him and just trusting that he will care for you. Like it's just a lesson we just need to learn. So I just wanted to encourage you with that. And then I think why Peter mentions this verse about the devil is because when you start thinking about those excuses, you start thinking why you shouldn't love in the church, the devil's just sitting there going, oh, here we go. I'm going to take a chunk out of that. It's like, oh, but I mowed that guy's lawn last time and he hasn't gone and got a mower and, I know he's got the money to do it. You start rationalising in your head and then the devil's going, oh, yes, we're almost there. Takes another chunk out. And the next thing you know, he's taken, there's not much left of you because he's just taking chunk after chunk because you've just sat here making these excuses and this, you haven't moved and your love's been crippled. And instead of just marching on with God's Spirit, you've just sat there as this banquet for the devil to just chip away at. And it's a tragedy, but that's the picture we're given. It's like here's this lion that is just waiting for you to give up, to just give up on loving, to hold on to that grudge, to start worrying about, oh, will we have this if we give this? Like it's that fine line between where, faith in God becomes real and where the devil just takes you and goes, all right, if you're going to be that lazy excuse Christian that just sits there and warms pews in church, then he'll just feast on you. And then sooner or later, he'll get deep enough that he'll rip your joy. And then you'll just be coming to church because maybe that's what your parents did. You know, it takes effort to be a Christian. It takes effort to be a part of a church. It's going to take tears. It's going to take sweat. You know, there's a reason. I love how the commandments God talks about all your might, you know, as in like, we think about that in a race, like just, or on the soccer field, giving your all. But like in terms of loving people, like what does that look like? Relying on God's Spirit. Anyway, it's enough about excuses. I just wanted to hammer that because I see it in me, and I think we just need to keep each other accountable, and we have a high standard. We have a great God who has loved us. Jesus didn't give excuses, even when he was taken advantage of, when he could have slept in, he could have done all those things, and he went to the cross, and that's the man we should be following. So I just want to talk about a couple of the practical things now, just some observations, and I'm hoping what it'll do is just create some discussion as well within the people here, that we can talk about just how we can better serve people that are up the front, and then how you can, if you're being served in the congregation, how do you relate to that, and how do we encourage one another so we don't become proud and yet we can stay humble with all that? Yeah, sure. Lord God, I just read your word and I just feel like it's a world away from the person that I am, and yet I just feel drawn there, Lord. I just feel like I'm not bowing the knee, and I'm missing out. I'm missing out on your joy, missing out on loving your people, and Lord, I've probably got plenty chunks taken out of me from the devil, and Lord, would you just show us as a church how to love each other? Lord, would you be there in those moments where we often just give up, where we don't count the cost, and we just give up so easily? Would you show us what it means to be like your son, who had every right to give up, who had every right to walk away from us but didn't, but he took the nails, and he rose back to life, Lord, and he is here now calling us to love each other. Would you help us as we talk about these ways that we love each other, Lord, to make sure that we're being healthy, appropriate, and honest, and ultimately that what we do would lift up Jesus. Amen. So I just want to focus on a couple of different areas in the church. It's not going to be all of them, but mainly the Sunday service, some observations. So service leading. A lot of the times the reason I'm doing this is because we don't just have like this handbook where it's like, if you are a service leader, you must do this. You must sing 4 songs. So what you have picked up from coming to Willowburn on a Sunday, it hasn't come out of this textbook that we've created. It's really come out of whether it be the desire of the preacher or what they might want to have, or a song that's picked, or there really is no structure that we're sort of locked into. So if you think that we are, it's definitely not happening that way. It's just, it's sort of organically happened that way. So, but what I want to talk about is, like, if you're a service leader in this church, is that you're not just standing up the front and you're not facilitating. So you're not going, and now the Bible reading, and now a song, now the sermon, now communion. You know, I think coordinator, the word, really, it's not a very good word for what that person is doing, because it has this idea of that you're like pushing the buttons for different things to start. But what I want to put it to you is in more of a service leader. So all of us have come from a different week, whether it be, steeped heavily in the culture of our day, distracted, our failures, our sin, tragedies in some people's lives. That's the type of, when you stand up here and you're the first person to talk on behalf of Willowburn on a Sunday morning, that's who you're talking to. You're not talking to Christians that are just overflowing with love and they just can't wait to sing and they've got no problems in the world. Like, you're talking to a needy people that need God. And that's why we can't fake it. Like, it can't be like a game show where you're like, hey, welcome to Willowburn this morning. And I don't want to knock people that are like friendly, like Luke, you're like that, mate. You're a natural encourager, mate. you smile and you make other people smile. I'm not getting on that. What I'm getting on is that if you naturally aren't like that, and then all of a sudden you sort of go into this, hey, and welcome to Willowburn, you're like, where? No. Well, yeah, I'll get to the whole personality thing in a minute. But what I'm getting at is that it's not a show. It's not because it's the start of the service, somehow you've got to be, woo, you know what I mean? Like, if God's dealing with you in a certain way, and, you know, if you've just lost your job, you just got a text that night saying, you know, you're made redundant Monday. I hope you wouldn't start the service pretending like nothing's wrong. I hope you would lead from a point where God is dealing with you. And that's not to say that you would make the service about you, but you've got to be real, you know. And I think all of us can sniff it pretty quickly when we're not being real up the front. And but what I'm getting at with that is that this idea of this culture that comes in, you've got all these people, and who knows, you know, maybe you're running late because the kids, you know, did a poo in their nappy, and you're like, oh, just took that extra 5 minutes and now we're late, and everyone's judging us because we're late. No. But you're coming from it, and what your role is as a service leader is to lift people's eyes. It's this moment where you're wanting us to feel that it's not about us, it's about Him. It's about lifting our eyes to Him, forgetting about our problems, our tragedies, and looking to Him. And so that's why it matters what you say. Like, that's why service leading, I think, you have to think about what you're going to say. You can't just have this idea of what Jesus is like and then rock up and go, yeah, I'll just talk about Jesus. Like, you have to think about what you're going to say and how you say it. So, for example, that means looking at the songs, incorporating the sharing, the praying, and keeping it together. So seeing that link where you see God share a message through somebody's story, and you weave that in. You don't disconnect it and go, now we're going to sing a song, when somebody might have just talked about, you know, God's greatness, His faithfulness in their life, and the next song might be about God's faithfulness. That's an opportunity to lead people and say, you know what, we're going to respond to this by singing about this song. That's why. So when you lead, you need to be thinking about, how can I weave this all together? Does that make sense? Because it's very easy to just make it very rigid and go, now the Bible reading, now this, you know, like. But if God's in all that, why are we trying to separate it like it's this? Oh, God's in the singing, He's in the preaching, but He's not in the sharing, and He's not in the, you know, those little things, because He's there. So that's my call to service leaders, that you just think about that, think about the people that are coming in, and just, a lot of the times you don't know what's happened in the church, and so you come to the prayer and share time, and you're just like, you're like, well, I would have done this differently if I'd known about that. So that's why it's also helpful to be a part of things where you're finding out about the people in your church. And then don't lead like other people. So what that means is, you don't go, all right, I've got to lead like Adrian Park, which means having a full-blown media kit, which is just like slow-mo videos. Like, that's not pressure you need. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I'll tell you, I was guilty of this when I was probably about 20, when I really liked John Piper as a preacher. He was one of those guys that just really saved me as a young, stupid teenager. But I listened to him so much that I started praying like him in my head. I could actually physically hear his voice in my head. That's how bad it got. That's when I knew that something was wrong. And so when we lead, we should be modelling it off maybe the truth that, say, Parky might share, or Raji, or Ben, or Luke, whoever's leading. But it should come out of who you are. And we need to see that. I mean, that's the colour of the church. So I hope we don't all, you know, we're not all looking like each other when we're up here. So it's okay to not wear shoes, Raj. All right. So on that I want to just quickly touch on what it means to, actually, no, I'll touch on the musicians first. So this is one I'm pretty passionate about, because obviously I'm a muso, and my ideas changed over, or God's continued to chip away at this idea. Music is designed as art. And essentially what it is, it's designed to carry a message and make you feel what has been written. Does that make sense? So you've got something that's been written and you're trying to play the instruments in a way that make you feel and resonate with what's been said. That's true for the whole world. Like, that's why you can have songs that are singing about something, and if the music doesn't match up, it just doesn't affect you in that way because it can be working against each other. But when we come to the church, we need to be singing truth and having songs that cause us to feel the weight of these truths. So, and what I'm getting at that is I'm not saying God, playing music really well, feeling a song doesn't make you closer to God at all. If you think that way, the song will end and then you'll feel like God's gone. So don't be caught into that, because I could pull out a Mariah Carey tearjerker and all have you feeling something right now, and I can tell you it would not be of God. So let's just lose this idea that somehow music's taking us closer to God, even though what it does is it takes our emotions, and this is what I try to do when I choose songs, when Gabe chooses songs, is that we pick them and go, you know what, we're going to pick songs that sound, that are going to feel the way that they sound when people read them, that truth. And so for example, one of the things I wanted to talk about now is maybe getting some ideas from you guys just quickly on how we can introduce a song better. Because we've got some ideas, like one of the ones I've got is having a song up on YouTube, and it would give the church like a link, and they'd have like a week to listen to it at home. So when they come on the Sunday, we're not kind of like doing it like we do the memory verse, because it kind of loses the impact that a song should have, if that makes sense. Anyway, I'll leave that question with you. If you think of ways we can do that better, because we're not always going to have songs that that we're going to be able to have a video for, but it does matter how we introduce them. So that's something to think about. And then how we play as musicians. I know Gabe's probably the only... we've got a couple of other people that are looking at joining us, part of the music team. But we've got to choose songs that reflect not only the mood of the truth, but the mood of the service. So what I mean by that is that when we come to communion, you don't pick a song that's like, yeah, Lord, I love you, you know, when you're talking about him hanging on a cross. Like ultimately that's what we do in communion. We do talk about his death and resurrection, but if you're going to talk about the death bit, you can't have... Do you get what I'm saying? It would completely ruin the mood. So something practical for you guys is to help us as musicians and go, you know what? That song was really helpful when it was played there, or, you know, God really spoke to me in that way. That would be helpful, because a lot of the times we just play songs and we don't always get feedback knowing if, you know, is this song helping you? Because ultimately we're up the front to serve you, and so that's why, you know, feedback on that would be really good, like good and bad. You know, whether it be a song that's too hard to sing or, you know, introduce, you know, whatever ideas you have. All right, so, and just quickly on the preachers, I just want to encourage you guys and just remember that we are speaking on behalf of God up the front, and that we will be judged for it. And he won't just have the recording from the Willowburn Church website. He'll have the heart recording as well. And so I hope that just encourages us as the men who are preaching, that we do preach with all our heart, mind, and soul and might. Because there's so much at stake. And I want you to know too, and I think the other guys would say this, is that we are open to criticism. A lot of times people think because we're friends, we're nice to each other, that you can't say something like, oh, mate, you really blew it when you said that. Like, there's definitely a way to say that to somebody, but what really grates me is when I've said something in a sermon and I find out about it through two other people, that this third person was unhappy with it. Like that's gossip. You know, you need to come to me and deal with me. I'm a young guy. I'm going to make mistakes, but I would much prefer that. And the problem is that I normally hear about it, and it hasn't happened a lot, but if it's happening to me, it's probably happening other times. And I find out about it midweek, and it's like, it's been going on during the week. Like, is that really how how we think about God's word and our love for each other, that we've got to like have this big discussion rather than actually going to the person who's done it. But also to you men who preach, we've got to be willing to take it. We've got to be willing to take punches and go, you know what, yeah, I blew it when I did that. And we do that in the School of Ministers, just so you guys know, when we do preach, we pull it apart on a Wednesday morning and we go through a whole bunch of questions. So that's happening in terms of that group there, but we're also only seeing the sermon through 4 sets of eyes on that Wednesday morning. So please, and I'm welcoming all criticism in terms of, you know, if God said something to you that was encouraging, please let us know. And I'm not saying that to get a big head, but sometimes you finish preaching and you wonder what God's done. Yeah, and you wonder, Lord, did I blow it? You know, and then 2 days later you go, oh man, that time when you said that, and you're like, oh Lord, thank you. You took one little thing and you did something really great in someone's life. Like, I don't think we're going to get proud heads. I would hope we wouldn't. It keeps me humble when I get feedback like that, because I look at it and go, God took old crappy Tim Burstow and he made something cool happen in someone's life. I know it's not me. So I just want to encourage us to be a church that's open, that we can talk about it with each other. And, you know, you don't have to give feedback straight away. You know, a lot of times it's this awkwardness after the service. You preach the sermon and it's like, well, if I walk past Adrian after he's preached, I guess I better say something. And, yeah, it was a good sermon, mate. Sometimes we don't know what to say. And, you know, some of us react differently. Like, I'm the type of person that I can't react straight away. I need to go home, spend hours chewing over what I've heard. Otherwise, it'll just come, yeah, that was good. But actually thinking about it, some of you are just so attuned that you can just come out with, well, you said this, and, you know, your train of thought is much more in the moment. So it's okay to not say anything on the Sunday, but I would plead with you, if God has done something with the sermon, we need to talk about it as a church. Because if we really care that God's word is this powerful, living, you know, it is God coming, speaking to us, then why aren't we talking about it after it's gone? We put all this effort into praying about it and making sure that we're truthful and that we nail it on the day, but then there's really not much follow-up. And so I want to put that out on the congregation's behalf, that we need to be open and be talking to the guys that preach. And it'll keep us humble, and if you see us getting us proud, that's why we're doing it in a group, because hopefully, you know, if one head starts getting proud, the other 3 humble ones can deflate it. You know, it's not like it's one guy just preaching every week. So, but I think we need to do that so we're encouraged in love. It definitely encourages me when I can see God doing something rather than wondering what he's done. All right, 2 more and we're done. Communion. I think this is something we really need to think carefully about how we lead it, because it's, regardless of what's been preached, it is such a deep and weighty image of our Lord on the cross. And I fear sometimes we rush through it and sometimes we don't give it its due. And that's okay if you're feeling it and you're just lost for words. But I think a lot of the times it's because we haven't thought about what we're going to say. And it does do that. That image of Jesus on the cross, you do go through this sort of loss of words where all you can do is but look. But you must remember that if you're leading that, you've got to be lifting people's eyes. You've got to be saying things that draw us to the picture of the cross, whether it be the horror of the nails or the wonder of the empty tomb. Whatever it might be, like, you need to really think carefully about what you're going to say and how you say it. Even, and I would encourage you, even think about how you gesture, your body language. You know, it's one thing to just stand here and just go, well, now we're going to remember, maybe a click in your fingers or something like that. It could be a nervous switch, that's fine. But you got to remember that comes across differently to people. So people can look at that and go, you know what? He's just not even thinking about this. So I just want to encourage you to think, when we do lead communion, we are remembering what Jesus has done, and there is a weight to that. And so that, I'm pretty sure it's not just people who are leading. Sometimes we have people that just do communion. So that's a word for you guys. And again, criticism from the congregation is fine, but let's make sure it goes to the source, and let's do it in love. Because sometimes there can be personalities that just say things in a certain way and they mean it, but we take it as well, you don't really care. But if you don't talk to them about it, you're not going to know. And if you don't get to know them, you're not going to know either. So I think there needs to be that give and take too, where when we say things, we're kept accountable, you know? Would everyone agree with that? I think that's fair enough that we're loving each other in that as well. And so, I just wanted to finish with the congregation, which is all of us really. Like, we all have terms where we sit and we're served and we get to be spoken to from God. I just want to encourage you is that there's a lot of young Christian men who are stepping into these roles, and there's just things we just can't see that you guys are just seeing. They just seem so obvious that they're not even on our radar, that when you tell us, it almost feels like, who are you talking about? And I just wanted to just encourage you to do it in love. Whether it takes a day to think about it before you say something. Happy to hear about it, whatever it might be, but let's do it in a way that loves, that builds up, and that can be tough love too. That can be, you know what, mate, are you really walking with the Lord? Were you really walking with Him when you preached that, when you said that, when you sung that? And I don't think God wants us to come to church with a notepad going, all right, Rudgy's not wearing shoes, Tim's got really sweaty armpits. You know what I mean? That's not what I'm getting at. I'm talking about flags that might come up. Like, I hope we're coming here for God and that the people leading the service are lifting our eyes to Jesus. But then there might be something that comes up, but let's put it in the back of our pocket and bring it out and talk to them after. Let's not, keep bringing it out in the middle of the sermon, you know what I mean? And it's distracting you, it's killing you. It's like, we're not doing this on purpose to drown this church. We're trying, and, we're learning things. So let's do it in a spirit of love. And that even goes in terms of music too, like music style. Like, Gabe and me have done it for so long on our own that it sort of has made a style in the church because it's just a guitar, and things are about to change with people coming on board that are going to play different instruments. And so we want to serve you guys. I've really struggled to come to grips with this because I've always been like, no, I'm the artist. I love music. I understand it. And then someone will go, that song was just, I just couldn't keep up with it. It was too fast. And like, what do I do with that? Do I get irritated and just go, well, I'm just going to play it next week and I'm going to let God do His thing? Or do I go, you know what? No, I've got to serve these people. And if they're struggling with it, maybe there's some truth to it. So anyway, noisy kids, temperature of the room, you name it. Like, they're all things that I'm hoping that things like that aren't the things that are flagging us. I hope it's like things of God where we go, you know what? I see something here, and you do it in humility. It's not the peripheral stuff. We're always going to have noisy kids. We're just that type of church, Like, I know people have left this church because we don't have the world's greatest creche service. But who are we here for, We're here for God. And so I just think if you're going to be at Willowburn, you've got to be willing to put up with that stuff. You know what? There's plenty of churches with great childminding facilities. You go for it. I just want to end with a couple of questions, which is, what can you bear in love? And so we talked about criticism, but I want to think about things that people just do. It's their personality. It's who they are. It's not sin. I think there's that fine line between where it is a sin issue, but it's just stuff that people do that's just part of the body of Christ. I mean, it doesn't bother me that Rudgy doesn't wear shoes sometimes, but it might bother other people. But, is that a sin issue? I don't think so. So you got to think, do I go up to Rudgy and talk about it? Sorry to use you an example, mate, but it's an easy one. Like, that's the type of stuff we need to think through. And I'll tell you how if you think it's more than just that, because you'll start talking to other people about it. That's when you know that it's grating you and you're not in love. And you've taken something and you're like sitting around the dinner table going, oh, Rudgy with his shoes off. And you're like, why are we even talking about this? You know what I mean? Like, it's not a sin issue. And, how is that loving? You know what I mean? So I want you to think about that when we do give criticism and feedback, that we really think, is this something that I just need to bear in love? That's just my brother. That's who he is. I praise God that he's not like me or sister. Or is it a sin issue that we need to speak up about or raise a flag? I think we need to think about that, and that's why I don't think we should be reacting straight after a service. Like we need to go away and think about it and ask God, is that me? Did I come to church with a judgmental spirit? And, I don't know. I think I just summed all that up. Oh, and the other thing I just want to tackle is those who do lead in the church is that we aren't very great at receiving gratitude, mainly because I think we feel like when somebody tells us something that God's done in our life, we go, oh no, just give God the glory, mate. It's this kind of, couldn't have been me. And I get that, and it's definitely true, is that God is working through us, but it almost makes the other person feel stupid from coming to you and saying, what you said there really helped. I think there is a way to rejoice in what God is doing and what God has done without kind of pushing back the love that's coming from a brother or a sister. And I don't exactly know how that's done in a healthy way, but I don't think we should... Well, exactly. Well, yeah, there's a good example. But I think it's that when somebody gives us something, whether it be from a song or a sermon or something like that, we struggle to think about, oh, wow, God's actually done something in me and it feels good. And, we almost feel like we should be humble and we shouldn't feel anything. But that should give us joy as well. So I hope we don't push that back when someone tells us something about God. I wanted to bring that up because I think Aussies are very big at, our culture is very big at when we say something nice to somebody, or I'm trying to think of the word, not accommodate. When we compliment someone, we're very good at pushing it back, almost like, oh, that couldn't be me. And Aussies do it. It's just we don't know how to receive love. We don't know what to do once it's given back to us. Which is why you see people on shows when they are given love, they just bawl their eyes out. On like those home makeover shows, because it's like, we're Australian, we want to be seen as having it all together, and then somebody's just come and given me what I need, and we're like, oh, I don't know what to do, and then they just bawl their eyes out. And I just think it's similar like that in the church, where we need to have a healthy culture where we're humble, we're not proud, but we also need to talk to each other and be honest and see this church grow and be willing to take a couple of punches if that's what we need. I've been given punches over the years by men, not literal ones, but that's the tough side of love as well. So I'm going to sort of close it up there. I've really only just touched the surface on a lot of those things, but I really just wanted to flow in and out of the different things we see on a Sunday, that we think about why we do it, and that we're in this all together, that it's not just Gabe and me playing music, but you guys are in this too, and we're doing it to serve you. And so let's be a church that talks and that grows in love for each other. And when we do criticize, we do it out of love. And when you do step up to the plate, you do it without grumbling, because you're doing it in love. So I might just pray, and then those that don't want to stay for the PCO can go. Lord God, I've touched on only a few things today of how we do church, and Lord, I just pray you would just show each and every one of us what it means to love in this church. To love like your Son, Lord. To love without grumbling, complaining, and when the worries and the anxieties come, Lord, that we would cast them on you. Lord, it's hard work being your church. It just is. But it's work, Lord, that is not a burden. Lord, would you make us a church that willingly step up to the plate, that willingly serve, that willingly love. And Lord, I just pray that we'd be an honest church, a church that can speak hard words into each other's lives, questions into each other's lives, and we wouldn't just quit. We wouldn't just leave, Lord, but we'd actually sit there and listen. And so, Lord, I pray that when we do speak out, when we do have hard things to say, that we would do it in a way of love, that we think about the way we say things. Oh, Lord, this Sunday service is such a small part of the week. And yet it's such a special time, Lord, and I pray we would give it its due, which is a time where we come and we have our eyes lifted to Jesus. Lord, show us how to do that in creative ways, in ways that glorify you, that songs, Lord, that are sung and played in a way in the truth of the gospel. Lord, sermons that are preached as your truth. Lord, and as a congregation that are doers and not just listeners of the word. Lord, would you help us, because all of this is too much without your Spirit. So Holy Spirit, would you take this church and make us more like your Son, in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, well, I know I've yabbered on about that, and there's probably questions and stuff that have come out of that. And that was kind of my plan. I wasn't going to talk on everything. I'm sorry if that's gone longer than I thought it would. If you need to go, you can. I just wanted to touch those who are leading, who might be struggling with how to use PCO. I was just going to it'll take about 10 minutes to show you.